Okay. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's well. And welcome to my workshop on Fair Isle Headband. I'm just looking to check that I can see the questions coming up on Facebook, but I can't at the moment. I'm sure it'll come up. Anyway, so this morning, what I wanted to show you was and teach you how to do is this Fair Isle headband. You'll have had the pattern, which would have been sent out earlier. And really, this is just to talk about different ways of working a Fair Isle pattern, talk about a bit about some colour schemes, and at the end, kind of go through some of the ways to sew it up. Not only sewing the ends together, but also sewing the inside with all these ends. Okay, so that's what I thought we'd go through. So I did this pattern really so that you could use up some of your small balls. So you'll see I've got lots of little small balls in lots of different shades, and this really just helps use them up rather than I dread to say this, put them in the bin. I've used a full ball of yarn for the main color, and then 4 different shades of leftover yarn, and they're all in this lovely Rico Design Essentials Merino DK, which I think is a great yarn for doing Fair Isle, just because it's wool. So you can do Fair Isle in lots of different yarns, but yarns that have got a high wool content are the best. The other thing to say about this headband is I've done it in a DK yarn, but actually you could probably, it would be, if you chose to do it in something like an Aran, then it would just be a bit wider and you'd have to make it a bit shorter. But I have put in the pattern to do it versus to get it to the right length, so you could probably accommodate that. So the really weird thing is I'm not getting the video up of myself here, so at the moment I can't see any questions that you've got, so you'll just have to excuse the fact that I seem to be talking a lot. So to come back to this, I want to talk a little bit about colour schemes first, because I've done a couple of alternative swatches just to show you some of the effects that you can make. So looking at the pattern, when I sent the pattern out, I colour coded it really in the colours that I'd chosen, but that isn't to say that you have to use those. So I quite like this kind of dark teal colour with the contrast with these 4 different colours. But there are other shades, and we're going to be working on a swatch today that are in these shades. And I'm going to change the angle of the camera imminently so that you see my hands rather than my face, because that's really where all the action is going to be today. So just bear with me a wee sec and I will move this camera. Okay, so now we can see a bit more. Okay, I'm still not getting the live video, which I don't really know why I'm not. So I think what we'll do is, if there are any questions that I'm not able to answer, then I will get back to you after this session. So I've set this stand up so that hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So first, I'm just going to move that out the way and just show you the colours that I used with these. So this first one, okay, it's just about okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. So whilst it needs a full ball, it doesn't need a full ball to do this, of the main shade, really you're only going to want small amounts of these alternative shades. So I've got varying sizes of balls here for that one, and for each row of colour where you've got Fair Isle, you need about 30 to 40 centimetres of yarn. So of course I have a ruler here, which is a great thing. Yes, you can use a tape measure, but rulers are quite handy, and I've been measuring them out. Okay, so that's the first thing. So that's quite a lot of yarn wouldn't have used all that. I hardly used any for these. Okay, so that I'm going to put that aside now so we can see the alternatives. Okay, so I just started knitting this. So this pattern is in different shades. So I've used a purple, which is still attached because that's what we're going to be working on as the background color. And instead of the sort of mustardy color, I've used a navy blue. You can see I've just got a little bit of that left. I've then used sort of a magenta color. That's that one. And then I had a bit more of the pink, which I've used for the center, and a bit more of the yellow. But that's because I happen to have quite a lot of this yarn, because I've just written a hat book, which should be published later this year using this yarn. So I have got lots and lots of it. Okay, so this pattern, I quite like the color scheme on this, was a whole pattern row, whole 30 row pattern, and I'd just done one more row in order that I could get to the point where we were going to be starting on the first Fair Isle row, which is row 5. So what I'll do in a minute is just knit and purl that row, and then we'll just start it based on row 5. But that wouldn't be, I've not done quite as many rows. I'll have missed a few rows out. That's okay. Okay, so the other thing after we've kind of started on this, I'm going to show you another swatch that I've done in another color scheme, really as a slight alternative, because there are lots of ends to sew in this. Now, I don't mind sewing in ends because I love sewing, but as you can see, there are quite a lot of ends that will need sewing in it at the end. Okay, so let me just do this row and I'll just talk to you at the same time, so I can do that. Okay, so I really don't know why I haven't got me on coming up. I'm just going to see if I redo it that it comes up, but it doesn't look like it's coming up at all. Oh no, I'm there. Fabulous, I am there. Right, continue watching. Right, so can I do this? Oh, all right, I've come up. Fabulous. Right, I can now see any comments. If anybody wants to ask anything, please do. So you'll notice that, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to move the camera forward a bit because it keeps wobbling. There. Okay, so oops, because I'm trying to look through the screen and knit at the same time. So you'll notice that for this headband, there are 4 knit stitches at either end, and the reason for that is, of course, garter stitch, it stops the headband from curling. And I'll just show you, this is a little bit fiddly just because of the angle of the camera. You just have to bear with me. I might move it slightly once I've finished this row. Yeah, so as much as I love stocking stitch, it curls, and no matter how much you block it, it's still likely to curl, which is why there are these garter stitch stitches at both ends. So I'm just checking that you can see, but there's a slight time lag on the video, but it looks like it's all fine, which is good. So there's the 4 stitches. See, I nearly purled them there, so go back to knit. Right, so now we're ready to start row 5. Okay, so row 5 is going to be in the navy blue. But what I'm going to do, because just to give you a bit of background, so Fair Isle, the traditional Fair Isle, you never use more than 2 yarns in any one row, and they're all woven in. So you can create a Fair Isle effect using other knitting techniques, either a slip stitch pattern where you just work in 1 yarn. A mosaic pattern is another way, which is slipping stitches too, or you can create duplicate stitches and actually use sort of a mending or an embroidery technique to go over the stitch with a duplicate stitch, Swiss darning, to create the Fair Isle effect. But in this tutorial, you can see we've worked in 2 yarns across each row, and these are called floats, like the yellow ones are quite obvious there. Okay, so if you're knitting a jumper that doesn't have garter stitch at either end, you would take the two yarns right to the edge, but because I've put this garter stitch edge, I didn't want to make the garter stitch edge any bulkier than it is, because of the way garter stitch works means that it's a thicker fabric than just stocking stitch. So although when you do fair iron, it turns into a slightly thicker fabric anyway, because you've got 2 yarns. Anyway, so the reason I said that was because instead of joining in this navy blue yarn at this point, I'm going to join it in after the garter stitch, so 4 stitches in. But to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, so for the pattern, you're going to go a right side row that way, then you're going to work 2 plain rows in the main colour, and then you're going to take it back across that way. So I reckon I want about 70 centimetres of yarn. So rather than having to have the whole ball that then could get all tangled up with this one, for this sort of headband, when you're only doing a small amount of fair isle, it's easier just to measure out the yarn, and then it's easy to untwist. So our first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a pair of scissors, and I'm going to measure. So so if I look, so the needle's about 30 centimetres, so I'm going to sort of just measure a bit longer. So there's my yarn. Oops. I'm going to cut it there, put the navy blue aside. So now I've got this piece of yarn. So first things first, I'm going to knit 4 stitches without hopefully knocking the scissors, which are just bumping into the end of the needle. 3, 4. Now, I'm not the most traditional of knitters, so I know some knitters would be horrified that I'm doing this, but I always tie, this goes for any colour work at all, so it might be stripes, might be something else. I tie the yarn just with a half hitch to the working yarn, and I just pull it up, and at the end I undo the knot, or sometimes I don't undo the knot. It depends how it is, how the stitches lie, and then I weave it in. So I leave it like that so you can see that, and now I've got the 2 yarns that I'm going to use for the fair isle. So if you look at the pattern, we do 1 stitch and then we use the first contrast, the navy blue. But what I wanted to talk to you about, I suppose, and teach you is, well, there are different ways of working fair isle. So the simplest is just to use pick up and drop each yarn. So pick up the one you're going to work with, knit a stitch, and then drop it and pick up the other yarn. Okay, so that really is the simplest way to knit fair isle. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is, because you've got 2 yarns, and the best way to avoid having them ending up like spaghetti is you always take 1 yarn underneath and you always take 1 yarn over the top. So the way I did that then was I took the blue yarn over the top. So that's what I'm always going to do on this row. Could change it on the next time I use it, but for this row it's always going to go over the top. And the main yarn, the main colour yarn, is always going to go underneath. So then you knit that. So notice I'm not putting much tension, okay? Because what you want, can you see how elastic that is? Because I've not put much tension on it, okay? If you pull it really tight, it's going to sort of concertina and not have any give at all, which is not really what you want for your knitwear. So I've done 1 stitch. Now if you go back to the pattern, you do 3 stitches in the main colour, 1 stitch in the contrast. So 2, 3, okay. So then I'm going to drop this one and I'm going to pick this one over the top of that one and I'm going to knit it. Now you can see I've stretched that out a bit so that it will stay elastic. Okay, again, as I've just said, if you pull it tight, there's going to be a bit of a problem in the fact it's not going to be a very elastic fabric. Okay, so then I'm going to insert the tip again because it's easier because it stabilizes the two needles. I'm going to drop that yarn and I'm going to pick this one up again. Okay, again, knitting it loosely. You know, I normally wrap it around my little finger, so you can do that if you want. 3 stitches there, insert to drop it, and then take it over the top and knit a stitch, and then drop it, pick the other one underneath and do another 3. Let me just pull a bit more yarn from the ball. Okay, 2, 3, over the top, again spreading these stitches so they stay nice and elastic, and that applies no matter which technique you use. So then you're going to go underneath again, 1, 2, 3, and then over the top, and then you're going to knit these last few. Okay, just looking at the focus of this because the camera's quite close, it's not quite as in focus as I would have liked. I'll just do this a bit. Just bear with me and I'll see if I can do that. See if I make it a bit further away, it's a bit easier. Okay, so you can see there you've got your stitches. It's nice and elastic, it's not too tight. If you find that you're knitting too tightly, you could go up a needle size. So I'm here on a 4mm needle, an old size 8. Or if you knit really loosely and you feel your needle's about to slip off, you could go down a size. Okay, so then you're going to turn it over. So now let's have a look at this. So you can see that the purple's gone underneath and the blue's gone over the top. Okay, for every stitch, and in theory that means that they're not twisted, but the advantage of cutting the yarn is if they do get twisted, it's really easy just to untwist them because you've got a yarn end. You've only got one that's attached to a ball. Okay, so you'll have noticed I've left that stitch there. Okay, so now we leave this yarn, just leave it there, and we work 2 plain rows in the main colour. Okay, so you can just leave it where it is. It doesn't need any additional help. I'm just looking, that looks like that could be slightly more in focus. So 4 knit stitches, and I'm sorry you're experiencing the needle ends battering off my desk. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this loose loop as I finish this. Okay, so just do this, trying to make sure it's all in focus as we go. So what else do I need to tell you about Fair Isle? So yes, 2 colours. You'll sometimes see Fair Isle worked in 3 colours, but I think that makes for quite a thick fabric. If I was doing a Fair Isle which required 3 colours, I think I would be Swiss darning the 3rd colour if it wasn't too much. And the other way of working colour work, of course, is in tarsia, which is where you do colour blocks and you twist the yarn so you only ever end up with a single thickness of fabric. Sometimes these techniques could be combined because whilst these are all right, if you have particularly long floats that you want to weave in, I'll come on to floats a bit more, then you can see through. Sometimes they can be seen through. So you'll see here this loop's got quite big and baggy, so literally just pull it so it's not tight, but so it looks about the same size as the other ones. Okay, so I've got to do 1 more row and then we'll come back in Fair Isle and I'll show you the next technique of because there are kind of 4 ways of working Fair Isle really, in terms of how you hold the yarns. So I might be a bit quicker because this is a knit row, maybe a slightly less clattery. So if you find that you've got lots of uneven stitches, as I say, you can gently pull some of the either the floats or the yarn ends before you sew them in, and that can even it up. And of course, I'll always say you have to block things. So blocking is when you pin your knitwear out, and it doesn't matter whether it's a headband, a cushion, socks or a jumper. You can pin them out and you can spray them with water, or you can put damp cloths over them, or you can actually wet them, squeeze them out, don't wring them, whatever you do, put them in a towel, roll them up to squeeze the water out. That's another way. Pin them out, and that normally evens out some of the stitches if you're especially, even if you're a good even, I mean, I'm quite an even knitter, you know, but even I think my work benefits from a good block. Right, so now we're on the next row, which is now row 8. Ooh, sorry about that. So I'll just straighten that a bit more. So row 8 is a wrong side row. So from the chart, you read from left to right. So we're going to go that way across it. So as before, 4 knit stitches. Just looking to see. Oh, have I got some? No, I haven't got any questions yet. Maybe I need to have a little look. Has anyone asked me? No, I think we're okay. No question. Oh, 6 comments. Why haven't? Okay. Nope, no questions yet. Okay. Right. So there's your 4 knit stitches. So bring your yarn back. Now for this one, we work 3 purl stitches in the main shade before we work a contrast shade. So 1, 2, 3. Now some people would have taken that yarn right to the end, but I don't. So now here's the tricky bit. So bring the yarn back, find the yarn so that you've got both of them where you can see them. So I'm just going to give that a little tug so that it's very, no, that's a bit of a very gentle pull, so it evens out that stitch. Now, so the next method of Fair Isle is you hold both yarns together and you drop one and you pick one up. I've got them wrapped around my little finger together. The next way I'll show you is having them on different fingers. Okay, so what you want to do to avoid a hole is to make sure you twist them. So I've twisted that behind that one and I'm going to purl that stitch. Okay, so by doing that, that takes it over. So now my purple background yarn is underneath. So then we're going to do 3. Okay, and then spreading them out, we're going to take that one over the top. Can you see it's over the top of the purple? And then we're going to go underneath the blue. Okay. Oh, these needles clatter. Right, okay. Again, another one over the top. And I'm just gently tensioning them, very gently with my little finger. But it's really, if you tension them around a different finger, again, don't put too much tension on them, otherwise they'll go all tight. Okay, so there's one of those, and then we can drop the blue, but I'll drop it at the end of the row. Okay, so we've finished that bit of Fair Isle, and then we take that forward. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so put that needle down a bit. Okay, so what you'll see now is same sort of thing. You can see the under and over, and I'm left with this not particularly long tail. And actually, because we've finished with that for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the last bit off. So there's, I don't know, 15-20 centimeters left, but you'd rather have a little bit much than not enough, otherwise you have to undo it and redo it with a longer length. So I'm now just going to put that in the bin, probably. There's not a lot I can do with that. Right, so now I'm going to do, you can see it starting to form. Okay, so now I'm going to do the next 2 rows, which are just plain, before we join in the next one, and then we'll do the yarn over with 2 different fingers before we move on to the 2 different hands. Okay, So I'm just looking at the time. Gosh, it's flying by. Okay, so I'll do this as quickly as I can. There. Looking at my notes. So I didn't bother weaving in. See, that's gone a bit baggy again, but you know, at the end of the row, you can just pull that in a little bit tighter gently and it'll even it up. So they all end up slightly baggy because the floats are loose, but the floats need to be loose, as I said before, otherwise the fabric gets a bit tight. So hopefully you're not hearing the clattering of needles quite as much at the moment. And if they are, if you do find the stitches gone a bit loose, you can do this. When you turn over, you can actually just sort of gently tug, very gently, with the needle tips, a really good idea. Just pull these floats a bit and it'll just tighten the stitches up. Okay, right, we'll just do this row. Okay, 4 knit stitches. So yeah, I love Fair Isle. I don't, you know, I do lots of different designs. Some of it's Fair Isle, some of it's, you know, all sorts of other things. But there are, you know, so many different colour effects that you can choose. The reason I want, and I'm just hurrying because there's a bit I want to get to show you something after we've done these next few rows. So you can still see. Okay, you can see me zooming ahead. Videos a couple of seconds behind my knitting, which is a little strange. Seeing the live video and the recorded video, the one that's going out. Okay, so now we're ready for the next colour. Okay, right, so can you see how baggy that stitch has gone? So all I'm going to do is get hold of the end and just give it a wee pull, and that evens it up. Okay, the start doesn't tend to have that same problem because I've knotted the beginning. It's just the end one, but it's not going to unravel as long as you leave a long enough tail. Okay, so now we're on to the next shade. So if you look at this, it's the magenta. So there are 3 rows of the magenta there. So I'm going to make it slightly longer. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. The other thing about this is the less stitches that you have in the alternative shade, the less yarn it will use. So each stitch, because it goes round, is going to use more yarn than if it's just a float across the back. But this length should be more than enough for those 3 rows. So again, I'm going to knit the first 4 stitches so that I don't have any ends to weave in right at the edge. Okay, 3, 4, then turn it over so that I've got room to tie it in. Okay, tie it in, pull it up, and then you've got the two yarns. Okay, so just fiddly getting these. So again, you're going to hold them in one hand, but what I do, and I do this most of the time, is I wrap them around 2 fingers, which means it's easier to swap yarns, and because the yarns get used at different rates, they don't end up one of them ends up turning into a bunch. Okay, so that's what I do. So looking at row 11, I do 1 in the background shade, main shade, and then I move on, and then you've got to flick that out the way, and then you start with this. So then we've got 1 magenta. Now I'm underneath there, so this one's on top. 2 background, 2 magenta, 3 background. Again, you can see I'm spreading the stitches out with my right hand as I go. Oh, oops. 1 magenta, another 3 background, and then 2 magenta. See, that stitch has grown again. I'm going to have to give it another little gentle tug, another magenta, and then the rest are in background shade. Okay. And what's happened there is, if you look at my hand, they're not too different. So you can start to see, this is, if you have them both round one finger, then this is what happens. They end up with like lots of bits of yarn, but actually when they're around different fingers, it is easier. Okay. But now I'm going to show you the alternative, and you can see here this has got twisted. Okay, well, maybe it hasn't got twisted, actually. It's not too bad. But I'm going to show you what happens if it does get twisted. So let's just do this. So can you imagine this is what you've ended up with? Oh, let's do a few more. It's all twisted, and then that means you've got to start moving the balls. The easiest way to do this is literally to hold your work like this and flick it round. And then it starts to unravel. So keep doing that, and you can do this with any piece, and suddenly it's much easier to move the knitting than it is the balls of wool. Okay, so that's just a tip for if you're ever doing that with some get twisted yarns with any other piece of knitting. Okay, so I'll just knit these first 4 stitches. Okay, and then we're going to bring the yarn to the back. Now we're on the next row, so this next stitch is going to be the magenta. So this is where you wrap it around 1 and you wrap it around 2. This is continental style. Okay, I have to say I'm okay at knitting continental. I'm not so good at purling. So what you have to do is that, and I find it really fiddly. So what I might do is show you on a knit row because it is easier. Okay, so I've done the first stitch, so that's going to go. So that's now first things first, I'll need to show you something, because otherwise we're going to end up with a hole. So as I said before, you need to twist the yarn. So when you're doing that one, you need to twist them. Okay, so that one's around that finger, and this one's around my left. So you can see I've twisted it, and it will reduce the holes. So you purl the first one, and then you purl the second one. And this is where, as I say, do you know what, I'm not very good at this at all with purl. Okay, so we do 2, and then we go back to over, and then we do 1, 2. I'm probably making this look really hard, and it's slipping off my finger, but I'll show you on the next row because it is a bit easier. It is easier with knit. It is supposed to be much quicker, so I'm losing count. Okay, so now I need another one. There are lots of different ways of knitting, not just the English, yarn, throwing the yarn around the needle, which is what we tend to do. Okay, and for some reason it's stopped being around that finger, so we'll. Oh, sorry about that. It's because it's on a stand, so I do have a habit of knocking it because it's right in front of me. Right, let's try again. Right, so definitely making this look more difficult than it is. Right, and now I can't see what I'm doing. So we've gone through the middle one, and we're now on 2 of those, 1 of those, and then another 2, and then one of those. And then, because I normally work in a traditional manner, we'll just knit these and I'll show you what it looks like. Because the other thing with Fair Isle, most Fair Isle patterns are knitted in the round, which means you've got a knit. You've got a knit stitch, not a fiddly purl stitch. Okay, so there's 2 rows of the magenta, and you can see we've still got more than enough left for the next row. Okay, right, so we'll just do this next row, and then I want to show you something else. Because I know, whilst I don't mind sewing ends, and I find it quite a therapeutic way. Right, I've knitted those first 4, so now I'm going to knit the other 2. What I'm going to do is this. So I've got the magenta with 1, so 1, 2, pick that one up, and then we've got one of those, and then we're going to do this 1, 2, 3, 4. I hope that looks slightly more accomplished than doing it in a purl way, because I'm definitely better at doing this. You can see I'm still stretching it out as before so that it doesn't go all taut. Right, where am I up to? So, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. Looking at the time, goodness already. Right, so that was how to do it with 2 hands. As I say, my knit stitch I think looked slightly more accomplished than my purl stitch, but you know, you can still do it. It is quicker, but for me it's only quicker on the knit stitch. So there's that next bit. Right, so again, we've got a little bit of yarn left, but better to have a little bit too much than not enough. So I'm just going to cut off a little bit. Right, now comes the interesting bit. So one of the things I liked about this headband, let me just show you, is of course even when the 2 colours change, it's still got the background shade at the sides. But what that means is you have to break yarn and start again and end up with another section. So there is an alternative to that, and I have worked up a swatch and a chart here, which I'm just going to show you, but we're going to do it with the purple. So the reason you could take the 2 new different colour yarns all the way to the edge. This is what it looks like, but there will be less ends. Okay, I'm just checking I've got any. I don't think I've got any questions. That's all right. So as you can see, because you've got 2 knit stitches, first you're going to have the bump from the row below as well as that, so it'll be 2 colour 1 and then another garter bump row with the same shade on. But that does mean there are less ends to sew in. So if you like, at the end I can send you this chart, which is an alternative, and I'll show you the difference in the number of ends just now. So except my ruler's on them. Okay, so again it looks exactly like the other one, but there's the 2 at the end. Now you do have to be a bit more careful because you're going to the join is at the side, so you're going to have to weave them in over the garter stitch, but there's sort of less ends here. Okay, especially if I show you compared to the one that we've just been working on. If I can just remove that. Okay, so if you look at this, there's a lot more ends for that one pattern, and I've not done the last couple of dot stitch ones. I've only done to there. So lots more ends, lots less ends. So it's entirely up to you what you want. It's more ends to sew in, but maybe looks a bit neater, or less ends to sew in, but you've got the colour, you've got the stripe all the way to the edge. It's entirely up to you what you want to do. I mean, you could change, you know, you don't have to do, you can change some of these patterns so that they're all different colours. It really depends on what length of yarns you've got that you want to use. So that's what I really wanted to show you. Okay. Have you got any questions about that? I'm not seeing any. So yeah, that's the alternative. But as I say, I will send this chart out after. It's just got these to say go to the end. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll do that on here. So row 14 starts at is a wrong side row. Okay. So given I'm going to break that, you don't have to, you can go in 3 or 4 stitches and then join the 2 new yarns in just for the middle section and then work those, but then you'll have to join another section for this end in the main colour. You know, it's not your most balls, you can turn inside out and pull out the inside. So for instance, if I do this, I will find the end. It might take me a little bit to find the end of it, but that's how I if I need to work in more than with one end with one ball, I turn the ball inside out and I find the end. So clearly there isn't where is it? Oh, there it is. So there's the end. There's the end. And you just push it back in again, turn it the right way, right, otherwise it will end up with spaghetti. And you could use the first bit for the first 4 stitches and then tie in the last bit and use it for the last 4 stitches. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm thinking it is. Very informative. Okay, that's fine. And again, it doesn't just apply to this headband. Those are kind of useful little hints and tips. Hopefully I'm providing with some for various other things. So right, I'm aware that, goodness, it's after 20 to 12 already. So, but what we're going to do is we're going to do this, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So I'm going to cut this and I'm going to cut some new yarn. So again, a decent amount there. And then I'm going to look at what shade that was. So what am I doing? It's yellow and pink. So yellow and pink. So again, I've got 3 rows of each. So I'll do, although there's more of the pink than the yellow being used, but I'll probably just use the same amount because we're not talking about large amounts of yarn here. Right, so here's the end. So again, sort of the length of the needle plus a bit, 3 times. Okay, so there's my pink, and then my yellow the same. So maybe slightly less of the yellow because it's not going all the way to the end. Okay, and there's my yellow. Okay, so because I'm starting in pink, I'm going to tie the pink end first to this bit, just like I did before. Okay, just keep it tight, and then I'm going to knit, and then when I've got in 4 stitches, when I've knitted those 4 stitches, then I'm going to tie in the yellow, just so that you aren't then having to sew in the ends all in the same place. Okay, so pink. So here's 4 stitches. And the other thing to say is, just because you bring the yarn to the front because it's a purl row, and then just tie it in again. I'm going to stop. I'll do this one. I might just do this one, or I'm going to run out of time, I think. And I wanted to show you sewing together, which we will just use these 2 swatches for. So I will wrap them around 2 different fingers. And then I will, so we're on a wrong side row, so we're going to start with 2 of the pink ones, 2 pink purl stitches, and then we're on to a yellow, and again that's over, so the pink's underneath, and then we've got 5. So 5 stitches here is probably the limit where you don't want to weave in. So I'm not going, well, I will do it actually, I will. So just say we were going to weave in, let's take that one back. So you weave in so that you, because what happens with floats is they catch on things, okay, and then they pull, and then it can ruin how it looks. So that's why you catch them in. So say I've got 5 stitches here in this pink, and I wanted to catch in the yellow so that the float was less. So what you're gonna, and this is when they get twisted, okay, so you literally twist it round. Okay, so I'll do another 2, and you'll see at the end of the row what it looks like. Okay, you'll see there's a you'll see it's been caught, right? So now I do 3 yellow. So now, of course, the problem is the yellow is in the wrong place. The yellow's now underneath and it's been on top, and this is how they end up getting twisted. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do it again, and then that. So what I'm going to do is go underneath to try and remove some of the twists. So pink, so I'm doing 2, and then I'm going to go and twist it so that it's twisted in, and then I'm going to have to swap my fingers around to the ones I'm going to work with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we go a yellow one, and then the rest are pink. 1, 2, and then knit the last 4. Right, so I'm going to show you what the difference is now. Okay, okay, so let's look, can you see all this? So you can see below, these yellow floats are longer, they're over the 5 stitches, but here it's caught in the middle. See that? Okay, caught in the same place. But that's how they end up, the yarns end up twisted, because if you're catching them, then you're going to change this order that one's never, you know, one yarn's never below and one yarn's never above. They kind of get a bit, you know, you have to remember, you have to keep looking at your hands to work out which one, to try and keep the twists to a minimum. And you don't see it from the front. You could do, so you can probably just about see that yellow there, but you know, that's only if I pull it, you won't see it. If you're working in a light shade and it's a dark shade that you're stranding across, it is possible that you will see it, so you might not want to do that. But you run the, you know, if it's any more than 5 stitches, the float becomes just a little bit too long. Okay, so that's why yeah, that's what can happen. Okay, so you can see now the bump, like that one. You can see the 2 colour bump ridge starting to form there, but the next 2 rows, this bit's going to be in the pink, so you won't, it will just be a pink one. But I think the keeping it in one shade does probably look a bit better, but it's entirely up to you. As I say, it's ends versus colour really, whichever you choose. Right, what else? I'm just aware it's 10:02, so I'm not going to do any more. What I wanted to do now is sew these 2 ends together. So if you can imagine that you've finished your headband and you want to sew the 2 ends together, this is what my join looks like. Now I've used Mattress Stitch there. So just so Mattress Stitch is where you go in 2 stitches on one side, and then you go into two legs of a stitch at the other side, and you keep sort of changing, and it creates a really hidden seam. However, it's not the most firm of seams, so you would use that typically for side seams of garments. And this is all right, this is quite firm, probably because I've sewn the end in quite a long way. The other way that you can do it is using Backstitch, which is something you would use for, say, shoulders, possibly for putting in sleeve caps as well, because it creates a much firmer edge and that won't sag. I mean, mine seems to be all right, but that bit's a lot less givey than that bit. I think hopefully you can see that, but that's because I've taken the end all the way to here. Okay, So I'm going to show you both of those very briefly in the last 10 minutes. Unless anyone, and if anyone has any questions about Pharaoh, please do post post a message, and I'll you know, and I'll see what I can do. Okay. Okay, I don't see any. Oh, that's all right. Right. Okay. So I'm actually going to use the dark blue so that you can see it. Okay. So first I'm going to just make sure I've not got any, I won't use these. I'm just going to cut those for the moment. Got the dark blue. So to sew up, I use a number of things. So to sew in ends, I use a needle like this with a really big eye, because it's really easy to thread the ends in, and then you can sew in. That's a small one. These tend to come in packs of 3, I have to say. This is a small, you get a medium and a large, and I think they are brilliant. But for doing sewing up, I use blunt edge tapestry needles, and these are fine, and the eyes are big enough that make it easy to thread. I've got a bigger one somewhere, but for a DK yarn, this is fine. So let's just get a length. It's not too long, so a seam, so that will be fine, and thread it. If you struggle, use a needle threader, but that threads quite easily, right? And really, as you would in sewing, I do tend to put a knot in the end. I'm sure I'm not supposed to do that. That's what I do. And this is how I learned to sew. So make a little slip knot, and that's normally enough. So I wouldn't so the other way you can do this is use the tail. I'm only using a contrast yarn so that you'll be able to see this. Okay, so I would thread, because you're gonna have to sew it in anyway. Yeah, may as well use it to sew it up. But because I'm putting in a different thread, I will probably just kind of weave in a bit so that the knot is not right at the end. Okay, I'm just making sure you can see that. Okay, so if I was going to use Mattress Stitch, you want the yarn on the right side. Okay, so for this first one, I'd probably come up right at the end between stitches. The reason you use blunt tipped needles is so that you don't split the yarn, and you want it to be on the right side. Okay, so there are lots of yarn. Okay, so you're now on the right side of that, and you want to be on the right side of this. So I will stick it down and come up through a whole stitch, really. So that's too far up. First one's always a bit odd and doesn't always have to be perfect, so I do that and hold them, and then I'll start to use the legs. Can you see the legs of the stitch there? The left leg and the right leg of a stitch. You pull that through there, and then you do the same on the other side. Okay, and you can pull it. So again, I might miss 2 because I'm trying to do this. So you go 2 on one side, 2 on the other, and then you go through the next one. Okay, and then another one, and then another one. I'm just checking you can see this. Yeah, I think you can. Okay, this makes it quite easy. Okay, so and it turns into quite firm. There. So you can see they've kind of joined together. I am actually not missing anything out here because I'm trying to make it a bit firmer. Okay, right, and we just keep going with that. So that's one way to sew this up, you know, and that will be a bit stretchier, and then you can use the tail to weave in, to whip stitch at the back to close it off. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you backstitch with this. I'm just going to go through to the wrong side, and we're just going to turn it over. Backstitch obviously is and these needles will not want to do this because right. Okay, turn this around. You will also notice, of course, I am left-handed. You might not be working this way, but that's just the way I work. So I can pick up stitches right-handed, but I can't sew right-handed, I'm afraid. Right, so the thing for this is you can see the two cast on edges there. Okay, so there's the main cast on methods I use are either a cable cast on or a long tail cast on. These are both cable cast on, and really you don't want to be in the, you want to make sure, just like you've been working with the stitches rather than the edge, you want to be beyond this. So I'm going to bring it through here. It's probably not the greatest. I've split a stitch there. I see even I do that. So back stitch, we'll just go forward. You want to make sure that you're this side of those, okay? So you could even go there. But you don't want to create a really bulky seam. So you go back and come through there, okay? And it just, oops, it just does that. The other thing you can do, which I absolutely love, to make sure your seams line up, and I will have one in here, is use these fancy little clips, and you clip them, and then you know what you're sewing up is even, okay? And that works really well for back stitch. Down that one and then up that one, okay? I'm slightly less precious about splitting stitches with back stitch, just because that's kind of how it works really for me. I'm a bit of I do use Mattress Stitch much more. I hate to mention this, but if you've done a provisional cast on, you could graft the stitches together using Kitchener stitch, but that's a whole new, a whole level of complication that you don't have to do. Okay, so you can see I'm just doing this, and I'll just do this till we get almost to the clip, and then we'll just have a look at it from the other side. Okay, making sure that those all line up. Oh, so that's what happens. Sometimes the thread comes off your needle. Okay, so let's just rethread this. Okay, I'm just checking there are no questions. Okay, so you rethread it again, and I'll just do another couple more stitches just so that you can see, and then we'll look. Okay. Right, okay, I'll leave that there because I'm just going to do something else and then quickly. So, take the clip off. So you can see, so the first bit there is done with Mattress Stitch, and you can see the line wobbles a bit, but that next bit by Backstitch is much more even, okay? And still pretty, you know, still pretty, I mean, that's what you do on a sewing machine if you're sewing knit fabrics. You use like a triple stitch so that it has a bit more give, okay? So I think that looks really neat, okay? But you can use either. You know, the stitches appear a bit more seamless in that, but that line's quite neat too, okay? So that's that. Right, the other thing I just quickly wanted to show you, if some of you are not very confident with sewing up, I'm just looking for the needle, right, not sewing up, sewing ends in. So let's just have a quick look at and pick an end here. Let's pick this end. Okay, so again, my needle with an enormous eye makes it so easy. You do have to keep hold of it, otherwise it will undo, but it's easier to thread. Okay, so you want to weave this in. So the way I weave it in so it doesn't show on the outside is I'll kind of pick a smile or a frown, or I might, you know, do one, and then I'll start to pick up that one and that one and that one, 3. Okay, just very gently, and then I might come back. Okay, and if I just do this, that should be enough. Okay, and on the, okay, you can see a bit of that, but once you've tugged it, and it will be fairly invisible. Where's it gone? That's the one there. So I wonder why that's shown. probably because I've done that bit tight. Okay, but that is the way to sew there. Okay, so that looks a bit neater, although I don't know why. So I'll tell you why that's done that. That's because I've gone through the same stitch. If you find it's like that, you can just pull it out, and I bet you don't see it from that there. So it's not there then. Okay, you can see that. So sometimes I might go down if I think that's going to show through. I'll go down, see it gets hidden. But going through the backs of the purl bumps is the way to do it. Okay, and you'd need to do it sort of probably 5 times, and I normally come back on itself before I snip the end off, and then it's fairly secure. It won't come out, and you can't see it from the front. Okay. Right, if it's on the edge, and let me see if I can find one here that's on an edge. So here is an edge one, because I accidentally cut the yarn when I didn't think I needed to. So first things first, let's undo that little knot. I find the tip of a needle quite invaluable for things like this. So we'll just undo that. It takes a bit of fiddling with, but you will get it undone. There we go. And then you've got 2 yarns that need weaving in. Okay, again, let's do this. Now in a way, garter stitch is easier because you really can use these bumps, and because this is an edge one, I tend to do it like this so that you can see it's come out, hasn't it? But that doesn't matter. You can push it in, pull it through, and then you can go back. Just thread the needle through those bumps, and then if the yarn tail is short as this one is, you can do that. You can give it a bit of a tug, and then because it's an end, I'll just probably do one more, push it through. No, it doesn't want to go through. There, I haven't done that one, but then you really can't see that one. Okay, and then I just snip it. I won't snip it right there. I'll probably snip it with maybe a centimetre, half a centimetre free, but that really won't go anywhere. Okay, so I hope that bit's been useful just to talk about sewing in ends, because yeah, there are a few with this pattern. The other thing to mention with the pattern is, of course, I've done it so that there were 5 different 5 repeats of the pattern, but it really does depend on your head size. You want a little bit smaller because otherwise it will fly off, and then just sew it together. So you might end up, if you've got a small head, with something like that, or it might be a bit longer if you've got a bigger head. It really is up to you, but it's a really cozy headband because of course it is Fair Isle, which doubles up the fabric. So yeah, so that's about it really. Let me just check if there was anything else I wanted to tell you about. I think I've probably covered it. Nope, I think that's it. Has anyone got any questions? I'm just going to look at Facebook. No, I think that's it. So great. So if you would like to donate, that would be great. It's great for keeping all this going for everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've got any questions, you know, please let me know. Okay, thank you very much.